reach consensus, or it's just defined as 2/3 majority of the entire TRC. So in general, we would need 9 members out of 13 to vote one way or the other. Today we only have 7 members, so even if it was unanimous, we don't have enough to reach that voting recommendation. However, what we'll do is we'll discuss the CRs and come to a general consensus discussion, and then we can put forth the discussion to email to get the rest of the member votes in. We have a lot of CRs this time around in the change request cycle, so we really can't afford to not address them on these calls. Just a few admin notes. Tomorrow or Wednesday, I will send forward the email agenda, the voting list for the June 24th email agenda to the TRC members. I have enough CRs for probably 2 more email agendas after that. I want to keep them not too substantial so that you don't get overwhelmed, but I do have probably 50 or 60 CR summaries that we can move forward with to address by email. One thing to think of a lot with the non-substantial CRs is, whether or not there's a problem with the current map, or if we're just trying to make it slightly better, that might be fine. But have we had any complaints about this section is making it that we can't enforce this part or something like that? A lot of these changes, we could kind of wordsmith forever. So just something to weigh when we're looking at a lot of these non-substantive CRs. So in terms of the members, we're going to skip over the substantive CRs. I'll have to defer those to another call, unfortunately, because Michelle is still in the EOC for CDC, and she's not on the call to be able to present these CRs. So we're going to move on to the CRs that are further down on the agenda, and maybe I'll refer to this call as the Joe Show, because Joe Stefaniak has almost all of the first 20 or so CRs. I think Miklos has one in there. But hopefully I'm going to try to keep, a quick time limit on these, and hopefully we can really get through them and come up with some sort of recommendation. And then we'll just reach out after the call to the other TRC members to get their votes in so that we can wrap these up. So without Dewey, I'm not sure if you had any notes, otherwise we can get started.
No, I'm good, Amanda. Other than just general reminder to TRC members to work on their TRC evaluations. We are working on the Vote the Code conference. It will be virtual. There's still a little bit of discussion on exactly how that's going to happen and exact timeline. We may have through the end of August to get the TRC evaluations in. But we still want to try to have all the evaluations in by August 15th. So we'll hold to that original deadline, if at all humanly possible.
Okay, so let's start the agenda. The first CR that we have for a TRC member who's on the call today would be starting with 41222-0001, and that CR, and the next several are Joe Stefaniak, so I'll turn it over to you, Joe.
Okay, let me pull that one up. Give me 1 second. All right, 412-222. All right, so this one was from John Kelly, and it also is, there's a couple other change requests that are linked to this one, but we'll start with this one first. And I'm sorry, I got to get to this here. So this particular change request is looking at eliminating language that's currently existing in favor of some reference to ASTM standards that cover the same material. We've had several conversations over time regarding the scope of the MAC, and the submitter rightfully brings into question the scope in this particular instance. The submitter does point out that it infringes upon some of the requirements of ASTM F2376-17A and F2461-16E1 that are specifically referenced with the material that is included in 412.2. And it's really in reference to engineering compliance and conformance of the ASTM standard. If we are indeed looking to limit the scope of the MAC and utilize some of those external references to existing standards that fall under the jurisdiction of some of these other ones, those are indeed the appropriate section references. The change request is appropriate. In this particular case, 2376-17A actually addresses the requirements for the flume. 2376 is the nationally and internationally recognized standard for the design, maintenance, and operation of water slides. We already defer to this for compliance in other sections, and to the ASTM standard for design. If improvements or changes to water slide design are needed, they are indicated in the CMAC. It's the opinion of myself and others that we should work with ASTM to address those needed changes at the ASTM level as opposed to through the MAC. By independently incorporating changes into the MAC, there are the potential for creating some inconsistent standards between MAC and ASTM, which puts designers and developers into a little bit of a precarious situation, as ASTM is the standard of record. In my opinion, it is outside of the scope of what the MAC should be addressing, and we should defer to that ASTM standard for this. The CR, I think, is good as it is. It's just a deletion of the particular language, in this case, 412.22 on flumes. And there will be an additional reference, I believe, in one of the later change requests that incorporates the ASTM standard. Regardless, I think that it is important that we don't infringe upon that standard. So I would vote a yes for this particular change request. As far as the internal conversations that the TRC has had, as well as some of the TSCs, we've had some discussion regarding the scope of the MAC in previous years. There's currently language in the annex already that addresses the need to allow ASTM to govern design and construction of water slides. Specifically in the annex 412.2, 412.2.1. There weren't any member comments that were tied to this particular CR. From a pro and con standpoint, the pros would provide consistency and conformity to other entries in the MAC with regard to referencing outside external codes or standards that are already in place. By reference, it's providing a direct link to those codes and standards that will adequately address subject matter. We will allow for continuous updating of language by referencing those applicable ASTM standards, as we already do with other things. And again, that allows us to provide reference to the most detailed and up-to-date comprehensive standards available. We are eliminating potentials for conflicting language between the two codes. And it is taking advantage of the wealth of knowledge present on that ASTM committee who drafts the language for those particular standards without a need on the CMAC's part of putting together a task group or a committee to address some of those things. As far as the cons are concerned, there's some requirements for users to have access to and or knowledge of the ASTM code without the language being directly a part of the CMAC, or of the MAC, I'm sorry. It does not allow for membership in the CMAC to have any input or voting privileges on the standards or the language requirements without a membership in ASTM. And it would place additional education burdens on the AHJ with regard to knowing the applicable ASTM standards or having to look those up. As far as recommendations that I would suggest we make to the board of directors, we would probably at some point want to establish a committee or a task force to work with ASTM to monitor or participate in the standard development process on their side. But I would certainly recommend a yes vote for this CR. And then any future actions would be, making sure that we're updating to the standards that are necessary, as well as any additional evaluation of scope where it is related to ASTM pieces. And that's pretty much it.
Hey, Joe, this is Ellen. Was there anything in this text that's being deleted that's not covered in the ASTM standard?
No, the ASTM standard is much more inclusive than the sections here in the MAC are. There are a lot more requirements and a lot more detail in the actual ASTM standard than we already have currently in the MAC. They're not too far divergent from each other, but the ASTM standard is a little bit more detailed.
Oh yeah, and, the ASTM standards are already referenced. It's in 412.
They are, did you say
referenced?
Yeah, they are referenced.
Yeah, it's not, the change request isn't needed for that because they are already, referenced in 412.212.
Correct. Yeah, the change request here is to delete this specific language on the flumes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joe or Ellen, or Amanda, you guys may know, since the standard is already referenced in 412.2.1, do you know the reasoning for keeping the sections that the CR wants to delete? Were there any reasons for keeping that in there as the standard is already being referenced?
I had the same thoughts, and in the annex, it talks a little bit specifically about exits into landing pools and drop slides, which two of the subsequent CRs proposed to delete. But it is interesting because 412.2.121 specifically cites that they have to be compliant with the ASTM standards. So I'm thinking that there's probably a reason why these specific things were called out. And also some of these subsequent change requests are directly referencing ASTM F2376 in the sections. For example, the one on flume exits into landing pools, and then the slide runouts and the drop slides. So I'm not quite sure. I feel like there must be a reason why some of this was specifically highlighted and included, given that the section as a whole says that they need to adhere to the ASTM standards, and then in addition, have these requirements. The annex talks about the design of water slides being governed by ASTM F2376. However, the design of the landing pool and with associated water quality and circulation is regulated by the code. And then they're highlighting drop slides as well because of an incident. So I'm not sure. I think that is something to discuss as to, nobody's proposing adding anything to the existing MAC, and I'm not sure if, for this flume section in particular, if what the ASTM F2376 addresses specifically with the flumes and the dips. But I, for one, would want to ensure that they were, and I don't have access to those ASTM standards, but ensure that they're addressed in those standards before I would want to take them out of the MAC, because I don't really see that there's much of a conflict right now. And, I have a feeling that they might have been put in specifically because either just public health importance or because maybe they felt like they weren't adequately addressed in these other standards, given that those are the baseline for which, all these water slides and landing pools have to be constructed for based on 4.12.212.
That's what I'm thinking, Joe. You kind of alluded to it earlier as with these sections potentially being somewhat of an education for operators or AHJs as far as what some of the standards are, because a lot of operators, or I would imagine some or a lot of AHJs do not have access to the ASTM standards, or they're not looking through that, normally. So this might provide some guidance.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that, this particular change request it's a very generic and very basic definition of what these items are. The ASTM certainly goes into much more specific information about what those should be. I would make a mention that maybe this would be more appropriate as an educational piece in the annex, as opposed to the code, where the code can actually address the specific ASTM standard by reference. And then if additional information is necessary from an educational standpoint, that's more of an annex language or annex piece, then it would be appropriate for the code.
And this is Amanda. I guess that's one thing I feel like was not this specific 4.12.2.2, but I think almost all the subsequent ones that are in this group, the proposal is to delete the whole section, which includes references to ASTM F2376 and also, complying with the slide manufacturer's recommendations. So I'm a little hesitant if they're specifically referencing it there and kind of highlighting the importance to remove it if it hasn't been an issue at this point, if nobody's come up and say that, and if people are really worried about it, when a jurisdiction goes to adopt the MAC, they can always just directly reference the ASTM standards for these sections, or they can, take bits and pieces as they feel they need to. But I think that, this is probably was put in the MAC for a reason.
I think that I think this has been language that has been in the code prior to, if I remember correctly, the ASTM references were added from the original standard, but this language was not removed. I think this was the next step in that evolutionary process of actually removing some of the language that's already covered by the standard reference. At this particular point, I don't know that I see a direct conflict with anything that's in ASTM with the language that's in here. I just think it's probably unnecessary at this point if you're including the ASTM reference.
So Joe, did you have time to go through line by line and confirm that each of the individual points was actually covered under the ASTM? I know you said the ASTM standard was more detailed, but it doesn't mean there wouldn't be some like miscellaneous point that wasn't covered by the standard. Did you see any of those?
Yeah, so I have. I'm also on the ASTM committee. So I'm fairly familiar with those. There's nothing, at least in this first CR here, that would be left out of the ASTM code. Everything that is addressed in this particular CR is addressed in the ASTM language.
Does anyone else have any thoughts one way or the other?
I was just looking at the 2016 MAC, and it didn't have anything about the ASTM. Oh no, I take that back. There was under a couple sections, like the exit into landing pools, there was a reference to ASTM 2376. but there wasn't an overall requirement to go by everything within these two standards.
There is, Ellen. It's in 412.212. I'm looking at it as well.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
I have too many windows open and I'm flipping back and forth between two meetings.
Understand that.
Yeah. Oh, so even in the original Mac then, it did have, yeah, everybody needed to be compliant with the entire thing, but still they felt the need to have these additional things in the Mac. That's confusing. Personally, I'm thinking that if the provisions are in the ASTM standard and we say that they have to go with that ASTM standard, that we don't need to repeat it in the back. That's my personal preference.
I would normally agree, but there are a lot of organizations that use the Mac for a reference or for educational piece. And so I could see them looking at these for kind of educational purposes as well if they don't have access to ASTM. But as Joe said, if it was in the annex, that might solve that issue.
So with a lot of these that, talk about manufacturers' recommendations, does the ASTM standard have any language like that as well? That you have to design them in accordance with or operate in accordance with. I know that there's some general statements in the MAC about, that equipment needs to be operated, according to manufacturer specifications. I'm just wondering, for this design stuff, if we take out the reference to ASTM F2376 with the thought that it's covered in there, that's one thing, but I was wondering if it covers, manufacturers' recommendations as well in that standard.
So ASTM does address that in the operator sections, where they address that the operator needs to abide by the manufacturer's recommendation. The other thing ASTM does a little bit differently is it specifies what the manufacturer has to include in the guidance, right? So all of these pieces here are from an engineering perspective, but then there's also a section of ASTM that dictates to manufacturers and suppliers what information they need to provide to the operator, and then it closes the loop by requiring the operators to adhere to the manufacturer's guidelines. So it's kind of the complete circle, right? From the initial engineering and design requirements through the testing and the auditing of the individual design pieces, and then to the providence of the operating and maintenance information, and then the recognition that the operator needs to follow those standards and those guidelines that are provided. So it kind of is a complete circle on the ASTM side.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I totally agree with the wanting to not, include things that they're already covered by something that we're directly saying that they, that the design engineer has to address compliance with. I guess I'm just a little wary of taking something out that was put in for a reason theoretically, and just, worried that if it would have some sort of impact. I guess it's the whole leave well enough alone type thing. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't know about anyone else.
I kind of think the same thing. I don't know if anyone remembers, were there any change requests last year to have these removed? Or last cycle?
I don't believe there were any change requests, but it was a topic of conversation that came up at the conference with regard to limiting the scope of the MAC and making more of those references externally when possible. So I think that's probably where these change requests came from in this go around was from some of the conversation that was had at the conference in terms of making those, trying to rely more on outside standards when the standards are appropriate. I don't feel strongly either way. You know, I don't see anything in the change requests that or in the language that's existing in the MAC. I don't see anything in there that, at least at surface, that is in direct conflict with anything in ASTM. However, I do think it's unnecessary to duplicate it if we're specifying that we should be following all the standards of ASTM. The education piece shouldn't be in the code, in my opinion.
Okay, so obviously we don't have enough members to vote. You know, do we want to try to come to some sort of consensus on a voting recommendation, or just present our discussion to the whole membership and we'll all vote at that time? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? I'm not sure if there's anyone who's not on the call that would, you know, be familiar with this from a design standpoint or plan review standpoint. But I think a lot of it is that it that it isn't really a big deal either way, but you know, there's some pros and cons as well.
I think are the things that are listed, are those items that might come up on a plan review? Like, I don't think the HJ is going to go in and take a detailed look at the slide design and make sure that it meets all the ASTM standards, but maybe are these some of the kind of key points that they would look at in a design review?
I'm guessing that that's probably the case, that, you know, they're going to take the engineer's word that the engineer is certifying that, you know, these are being designed in accordance with the ASTM standards. But this kind of does help focus them into, you know, like for the flume, you know, the safety and the, you know, easily cleanable, that type of thing, you know, the really important things for health and safety. You know, the same way with the exit into the landing pools and some of those other, in the flume exits, I think because some of those, you know, start bleeding into water quality type things, the runouts and the drop slides. So I'm thinking that it would be kind of a helpful thing. That doesn't mean that it has to be in the code versus the annex, but I do think it's kind of helpful to see, you know, what the more important aspects are.
Amanda, going back to your question, I would recommend that on today, that the TRC recommends to the other members, you know, a vote. And of course, TRC members are always welcome to vote their conscience after they've reviewed the material. But that would be my recommendation on moving forward.
Okay, so why don't we, I guess, take a quick vote and see where we're at. How many people would recommend a yes vote on? I'm not going to go. I know that we spent like a while covering these, so just I think we can kind of treat this group of CRs pretty similarly. You know, 41222 was for flume, and then 41223 is for flume exits. 41224 is for the exit into the landing pool. 41228 are slide runouts, and 41229 are drop slides. And all these CRs are proposing to delete those sections of the code for the reason that they're already addressed in the ASTM standard. So how many people would recommend a yes vote on this group of CRs?
Joe Stefaniak.
And Ellen, as long as each of the individual provisions are actually covered in the codes, I mean, in those standards.
Okay, and how many people would recommend? Okay,
Sorry, I
Kevin, you're a yes?
my mute button. Yes, I'm a yes as well.
Okay.
And
I can assume that,
and
sorry.
sorry, not to belabor the point, but even entries like 412.244, the language in there, all it does is reference the ASTM standard. Flume exit shall be in accordance with the water slide manufacturer's recommendations and ASTM. So I'm just not sure what benefit there is to keeping something like that.
Sure.
This is Cindy. So I do plan reviews on these. So I have some I'm not sure I want it totally removed, but when you say manufacturer's recommendations and the ASTM standard, do the manufacturer's recommendations always have to follow this ASTM standard, Joe?
Yes, if it's something that's addressed by ASTM. There may be something where they specify a particular brand of inner tube or something along those lines, which may or may not be addressed. But yes, if it's an ASTM piece, then the manufacturer has to provide that information and the operator has an onus to follow that. I just think from an inspector standpoint, if there's an entry that says, you know, entering the landing port slide run out at a safe speed and angle of entry, I would think that that puts a lot of ownership if you're just following that and not looking at the engineering specifics of ASTM as to what that is. I don't know how you make that decision based on the MAC entry. I think removing that is a better alternative for anybody that has to do any of that.
That's a good point. I mean, it's really hard to assess a lot of this from the design phase to begin with, as opposed to being able to see it built, let alone, you know, with a lack of familiarity of you know, these specialized, you know, aquatic venues. I guess I'd put myself in the not sure category too. Anyone else a not sure or a no?
I think I'd be a no as it's written. I definitely see, Joe, your comment on some of them just directly reiterate the standard. And I think those are probably easy to remove. But some of the others that kind of seemingly point out something for the AHJ to look at on the plan, I think those might have some merit in staying in. So I think just a clear kind of cutting all the sections out, I don't think I would support, but maybe an alteration, I think I would.
Nicholas, would you approve it if all that were put into the annex?
Yeah, I guess I'm not a you know, I don't review plans normally, at least not to try to catch stuff for the, you know, health of the local jurisdiction. So I don't know how helpful the annex is, you know, for doing that portion of it. But yeah, I guess as long as it's still there, sure. I was trying to see if there was a kind of tool or if those sections were part of that MAC inspection tool, and they're not, that I could see. I was looking to see if there was another tool that maybe referenced those sections, but I couldn't find anything. So I guess that might tell me right there too that they're maybe not needed.
And just to note that we can certainly recommend that, you know, if say we recommend a yes vote on the CRs, you know, it would be possible to recommend to CDC that this material be moved to the annex. It might need a little bit of rewriting, but I think, you know, that they can kind of dictate what goes in the annex. So I think we can summarize our discussion as, you know, some members are not sure, but we're kind of leaning toward yes, you know, just although there is the leave well enough alone type thing. So I think we can frame it that way, and we'll just have to move on and see, you know, how we kind of vote as a whole once we bring this back to the rest of the members. But I think for the sake of time, we should probably move on. And when I send out the discussion later this week, please feel free, GRC members, to capture, you know, note anything that I missed that you thought was a big, you know, a point of the discussion for any of these that we really weren't sure about. Some of these I think are pretty straightforward, how we're going to recommend, but if there's things that I'm missing, please let me know. So let's move on. The next one is 46131-0001, and that was Nicolas Lucia.
Yep, let me pull that up. Okay, are we moving, Amanda, are we skipping the 4.5 CRs, 4.5 CRs?
Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, so Tina had the next group, and then the 4.5, yeah, we were going to defer those to a later call so that you could get some TST input. And then a few of those, sorry, we're going to be addressed by email, so we're skipping a bunch.
Okay,
and we'll
that's
do
fine.
this one, and then we'll go back to Joe's next CR.
That's fine. I just wanted to double check.
Oh, I'm sure everyone else is confused too.
Let's see. I don't think I pulled that one. I think that one was an easier one. I pulled some of the actual forms for some of them. So 46131. Pull that up. I think this one's fairly straightforward. So the CR wants to add language under that section number, and the language would state, where overhead lighting is adjustable to accommodate higher lighting levels for different activities, the minimum lighting level setting must ensure the minimum lighting levels are maintained as required at the pool water surface and deck whenever the lighting is on. So the gist of it is that if a facility is utilizing adjustable, a lighting system that's adjustable or kind of dimmable, that you can't dim below the minimum lighting level. It does seem to kind of correspond with another section, 4.6.1.2, which is which talks about natural light. And that section talks about where natural light is being utilized to light the area that there needs to be some kind of procedure. So either some automatic lighting controls based on the light levels or time of day, or some kind of written procedures when manual controls are used to ensure that the minimum light levels are always followed. So I think because it kind of mirrors that one, I think it was pretty easy for me to support this CR as it was written.
I'm going to be devil's advocate. This is Ellen. Like the minimum lighting levels are there in 4613. And so that's the bottom line, right? Is you have to meet these minimum levels no matter what. You can always go higher than minimum levels. That's what means by minimum. So is this statement really even needed, given that we do have a minimum in place and under all conditions it needs to be met?
Yeah, I thought the same thing, Ellen. That was my first thought on it. Well, if it's already stated, why do we have to show, you know, how they need to be, how they need to make the cake, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I referenced that 4.6.1.2, because in that one, it does state, well, you need to meet the minimums by either doing this or by doing this. So that's, so because they're stating how to do it in that section, it made sense to do it in this section as well. Was kind of my opinion.
I think it also potentially prevents someone from, maybe not realizing and installing a dimmer switch and, being able to have things operating at something lower than they were intended. Just having to make sure that at its dimmest, the pool's gonna, the lighting is gonna be acceptable. My only other comment would be to change the must to shall, which I'm sure the submitter would be okay with, so that we don't have this as a change request in the next change request cycle.
Yeah. I'm sure that would be no problem.
Does anyone else have any comments on this change request? Would any of the members present recommend a no vote on this change request?
I'm still not wild about it, but I'm not opposed to it either.
Okay. Well, you can always vote a different way when we send out the voting. So I'm gonna sum up that we're recommending the yes vote to the rest of the TRC, so that when they vote, I'll sum up the discussion and that we're pretty much unanimous on thinking that this is a good change. Although some people might feel it's not quite necessary, but let's move on. So the next CR is 4641-0001, and that's Joe's again.
Four 4641-001. Okay, so this one is in reference to the high temperature. The submitter's comments is really that the way the language was originally written is unenforceable and allows for any quote unquote measures to be acceptable if they're taking. He would like to provide a little bit of a less ambiguous statement and prescribe some specific measures to make it more of an enforceable requirement. The inclusion of a thermometer within the piping system to allow for that continuous monitoring of the temperature, and then to have a cutout if it exceeds that 104 degree threshold. The impact is really minimal where heaters are used. Oftentimes this equipment is provided in one way, shape, or form anyways. So there isn't a big change that is necessary to the systems that are already in play. When the original language basically just stated that when you're designing heating equipment for a swimming pool, measures shall be taken to prevent that exposure to the increase to 104 degrees and above. This language change would simply require a thermometer being installed in the piping system with a high temperature cutout to allow shut off of the heater to protect from that overflow. I guess the only question is it necessary that that is in the piping system somewhere, or is it an acceptable alternative to have that controlled at the heater itself? And technically, I guess that might be within the piping system. So I'm not sure if that's the appropriate language there or terminology there. But the change request in general makes sense to eliminate the overheating of the water and being returned to the pool.
This seems like a problem to me in that the temperature is never going to reach 104 in the pool if the piping, if there's a thermometer in the piping to cut out when it's 104 or more. So I mean, it seems almost like it doesn't make sense.
That's kind of what I was thinking, James.
Do you think even then for a spa with the huge turnover rate and the small volume that that would be an issue?
Well, if you've got a long pipe run, if it's coming out 104 at the heater, it may never, like James was saying, it may never hit 104 at the spa. And as an operator, I know I've had clients who, if it's not at that maximum temperature, they're on me about it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
This is Amanda. I guess this is one of those things where, you know, the MAC is intended to be performance-based where possible instead of prescriptive. And, you know, are there other measures that can be taken that are just, that'll work just as well? You know, here we would change it from basically allowing, you know, designers to put in whatever measure they deem would be appropriate to specifying a specific type of installation. And I'm just wondering, you know, is this really the only thing that people could do, or are there other options that we're precluding by requiring this specific installation?
Amanda, I think that gives two reasons not to do this. One is conceptually it doesn't seem like it'll work, and two is it seems to also be prescriptive, which is kind of not the intent.
I agree.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments about the CR? Would any of the members present recommend a yes vote on the CR? Okay, I'll note that, you know, in general, we're recommending a no vote for the CR to the rest of the membership. And I hope everyone's taking notes too, so that when you go to vote, you can remember what we were all thinking. I'll have it in the summary too, obviously. Okay, so let's move on to the next CR. It's 4610-0001, and that's you again, Joe.
Yes, ma'am. Pull that up here. Okay, so this particular change request is in relation to the deletion of spectator access to the deck. In essence, spectator egress, I suppose. But the submitter's comment really is that the egress width is not addressed except in relation to spectators. Building code requirements already address egress widths and are reviewed separately outside of the swimming pool inspection, and it's inspected and designed under the building codes, and that's where it should stay. Again, it's kind of an outside reference to the applicable building code, as opposed to inclusion in the MAC that specifies what that spectator egress should look like. Again, there's really no cost. It's just an address to the local building code that's already a part of what the AHJ utilizes.
So this is Amanda. I have a pretty strong feeling against this CR. I think that the intent when it was written was to make sure that the spectator egress, any area that's meant for spectators to walk around, does not impede the perimeter decking around the pool, which is needed for like pool use and emergency response. So I don't think it really steps on the toes of building code or anything like that. I think they're just making sure that there's enough area around the pool that you're not going to be walking into the main area where swimmers are and where lifeguards are and where, there might be a need for emergency response. Just like you would want to prevent people from lining up at concession stands, in the deck area that's right near the pool. I think this is the same. I think that's the intent of the section. So I don't agree with deleting it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It definitely is deleting language that's in addition to the width that's already included in 4815 from the decking perspective. And I think that would be a key piece to not have deleted.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about the CR? Would anyone recommend a yes vote on the CR? Okay, let's keep moving along. I'll write up that the TRC would recommend a no vote, and we will bring that back to the rest of the members to take an official vote. So let's move on to 48111-0001.
All right. Again, this particular one's pretty much editorial in nature. It's to strike out some language that just relates that the deck should be constructed in conformance with the provisions of the chapter that the change request falls within. If it's already addressed in the chapter that it has to be a part of what's going on, this particular statement is just a reinforcement of that, and it's really unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many sections start with something like this. I think it's a pretty common type of intro to a section. I don't know. I don't really have any, strong feelings either way about, whether it should, come in, stay in or come out. I'm not sure that, it's certainly not a specific code section. If something's, during the plan review, if it's not, and if the plans don't include one of the specific sections, that specific section would be cited, as the requirement and not just the general one, I would think.
I agree with the change request. I think it should come out.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions about the CR? Okay, would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? I mean a no vote, sorry. Okay, hearing no objections, I'll write that our small group has recommended a yes vote on this CR, and we'll bring that to the rest of the TRC members to take a final vote. Okay, the next two CRs, I think they need to be addressed separately. I think actually the first one is more like the one after it. So we'll just take these one at a time. So the next one is 481-612-0001.
All right. So this particular one relates to wing walls and peninsulas and the walking surface. The way it's currently written, it limits the entry to walkways and peninsulas that were intended to be accessed by qualified lifeguards. The change request is to strike that particular language and make it so that any wing wall or peninsula shall be constructed of slip-resistant materials. It does not appear that the code anywhere prohibits the use of wing walls or peninsulas by patrons or limits the use to only pools where lifeguards are present. So it's reasonable to assume that patrons may or will find their way onto wing walls or peninsulas. So all wing walls and peninsulas shall be constructed of slip-resistant materials, not just those that are intended for qualified lifeguards. Minimal impact, and I would probably be in favor of the change.
Joe, did you get any negative comments from any of the design and construction or anybody?
No, actually, I don't know that I got anything back from this because I sent it out late. Let me see. No, I have not gotten anything back yet because I sent it out late.
Yeah, because for me, it's hard for me to think, well, why not go ahead and make them slip resistant, right? But
Right.
But then, yeah, that's not my bailiwick, so. It's,
Just out of curiosity, are these things where people, there would be like a barrier or something to not allow you to walk out onto them? Or, is this something that, supervisory staff would use, but really, there's no intention that patrons would walk on them? I'm just curious as to, obviously if you don't expect people to walk on it, but they will anyway, then you would want it to be slip resistant to prevent injury. But I'm just curious about, the use of these in general. I'm not too familiar with them.
There's usually no intention for anyone other than staff to access those, but I don't know that I've ever seen any that have any kind of barrier. Some may put
And
like
by
a
staff,
cone.
do you mean like,
I was gonna say some facilities might put like a cone to keep people away from it, but that's about it.
okay. But do you mean for staff, would you mean people besides lifeguards? Because I'm thinking that they are spelling out specifically qualified lifeguards, but if there were attendants or, operators or something, maybe we do want to take that out so that it would be slip resistant for all those people and not just if it's qualified lifeguards accessing it.
Yeah, they would utilize it as well, like swimming, those managing like swim instruction and stuff, they'll use it to kind of get a better vantage point of the entire facility. Stuff like that, or managers when they're coming around to do a count or something might stand on it. It makes sense to do it, and honestly, I don't think it would change anything design-wise, because I'm trying to think in my head, like I can't think of any design where somebody would have put something that is purposefully slippery, like on that wing wall, because it saved money. I think it's going to be the same concrete and the same 1x1 tile, that's used everywhere else that is considered slip resistant. So I don't think it really changes anything. Joe, is that you that laughed? Like, do you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And why you would not design it as being slip resistant, I'm not sure, because inevitably someone's walking on it.
I'm not sure what material you would use to put on there. Like I haven't seen anybody put like a stainless steel grate or a stainless steel thing across it. That'd be slick. So
yeah, you're certainly not putting a smooth finished concrete up there or something to take the effort to do that. But.
Yeah.
The only question I had was, I guess with 481611, it calls out that wing wall or peninsulas shall not be considered part of the perimeter deck, but I'm not sure why it would be treated any differently. As 481612 talks about that particular piece being slip resistant. So I guess the perimeter deck in general,
I think it's
slip resistant. So just clarify.
The perimeter deck has to be 4 feet wide, right? So.
Right. Correct. So 481611 addresses that anything less than 40 48 inches isn't considered part of the perimeter deck. And maybe that's why the addition of the slip resistant language in 612 is because the perimeter deck already specifies that it has to be of a slip resistant material, but the wing wall, because it's not part of the deck, I don't know, I'm not sure why it was included in the first place, but I don't think it's necessary. Not sure it hurts anything, but I'm not sure it's
Yeah, I
necessary.
mean, it's saying that it's not specifically that it's not part of the perimeter deck if it's less than 18 inches. So maybe that they're requiring it that because it therefore doesn't, you know, fall under the standards for
Right.
perimeter deck, the code requirements.
Exactly.
I'd
So
be
would
fine with
anyone
it.
okay. Would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I'll write up that we're recommending a yes vote to the rest of the members when we vote. So the next one is 48167-0001.
Okay. Hold that up. Okay, so so this one addresses adding language surrounding the design of the wing wall so that all areas of the pool from the water surface to the walls and bottom of the pool are readily visible from the deck or peninsula if the peninsula is used by lifeguards. And two, that there's no abrupt depth change across the wall when the wing wall is used to separate young non-swimmers from other areas of the pool. So two pieces to the addition of that language. This would be a new section that would be added in there. The first of which is that from that peninsula, the lifeguards are able to see the entirety of basically of their zone of protection. And then the second piece would be that the wing wall is not used to separate a children's area, so to speak, with a deeper water section of the pool where someone would be able to climb across that wing wall and find themselves in deeper water. I believe that one is already addressed in the design of the wing wall piece, the depth change. I thought that was already addressed in another section where it prevented that climbing over that wing wall. Can't find the section, of course. While I look for that section number, I think the intention here was to really, one of the intentions was to take a more of a prescriptive, less of a prescriptive approach as to having barricades and it has to be done this way or that way, and making it more of a performance-based issue. Although I don't see a change request that would change any of the design aspects of those wing walls. And but that was one piece so that you have some flexibility in how you design some of that stuff and the control measures that are in place. However, there's a concern that wing walls can create physical obstructions for the lifeguards, which is accurate. And the wing walls can also create a hazard if not designed properly, with the risk of drowning if someone is able to cross over that from shallow water to deeper water. Both are valid points, but I believe both are addressed elsewhere. Let's see if I can find that code here.
I think the whole depth change thing has come up in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't think that ever passed, because when designing a pool, like the wing wall is used to get that depth change where otherwise you would have to have that long,
Right.
yeah, that long slope.
I'm curious about the first statement. You know, if it's essentially separating the pool, I guess I can see that you're trying to engineer out a blind spot. But, you know, depending on if the lifeguard is facing, you know, one section of the pool or the other, they're not going to be able to obviously move their head more than 180 degrees. But also, you know, other say that, you know, there are other lifeguards positioned where they have zones, and, you know, this wing wall, you know, if they can properly supervise it, you know, is it necessary or practical that the lifeguard on the wing wall can see the entire pool, I guess?
I think if it said their zone of surveillance, I think it would make sense, but to say that they should be able to see the entirety of the pool from there, I don't think that that's really possible.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the entry actually reads correctly. It's saying all areas of the pool from the water surface to the walls and bottom of the pool are readily visible from the deck or the peninsula if the peninsula is used by lifeguards.
Gotcha.
But I don't think that's a necessary statement because we already addressed that in the staffing requirements, that we have to create a staffing plan that allows for that visual surveillance of the entirety of the pool. So even with the wing walls, I don't think you can engineer that out, because you could certainly add an extra lifeguard to accomplish that. So I'm not sure.
And I think this is intending to, like, basically prohibit something in the design phase, that instead of engineering, you're going to engineer out the hazard in the design phase as opposed to the operation, you know. But is it even practical to be able to do this? Does it kind of defeat the purpose of a wing wall or a peninsula?
Correct.
And is it even achievable to engineer out the hazard in this phase? With these
The
types
abrupt
of
depth change
features?
is the point of a wing wall.
Yes,
Unfortunately.
exactly. You're engineering out the ability to have that depth change in
Yeah.
a short amount of space.
Regarding the surveillance, there's a statement in 481123 that says the designer and owner shall consider impact on bather zone surveillance when determining placement of structural, operational, and theming elements. So I think that covers the intent of that first statement.
Yes.
What section was that again?
It's 481123.
Okay.
And I don't think that covers, you know, the depth change, but I think John Kelly does have a point. Like, I looked at his supporting information, and, you know, there has been at least one drowning. I don't remember what his statistics were, but you know, where a kid went from a shallow area to a deeper area, and, you know, it can happen pretty quickly, right, when it's just that thin wall to cross over.
I guess part of the question is if these types of, you know, features are going to be used at a pool where you don't have lifeguards, or, you know, that aren't being used for swim instruction. You know, obviously things can happen, but, you know, I think it would be more of a concern if it was at a pool, like at a hotel or something, where you might not have lifeguard supervision. Or I think actually one of the CRs coming up is, I don't know if it requires lifeguards specifically for this. Oh, it's the underwater shell. That's the change request proposing requiring lifeguards, but yeah, and I don't know if there's other things, you know, that railings or things that can kind of signify that or kind of be a barrier that would I don't know if those would interfere with, you know, the ability of staff and lifeguards to be on a wing wall or peninsula, but I'm just trying to think of things that could be done to kind of alert people to the change in depth, outside of just prohibiting it entirely.
Can they numbers? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ellen.
I was just thinking of, you know, would we want to suggest maybe to John Kelly that for the second one to change the wording, maybe that if there is an abrupt depth change, then a barrier must be put in place or something like that?
Well, I think it also brings into question what is an abrupt depth change? Is it 1 foot, 2 feet, 4 feet? You know, that's something I feel like that needs to be clarified better if it's going to be code language, because it seems like it's up to interpretation of what that actually means.
Yeah.
I think that issue's come up in the past, and honestly, it could probably be its own like kind of subcommittee to try to tackle that.
I think there was, yeah, I think there is that subcommittee for these things, and I think John's part of it, but I'm not sure how much they've gotten that up and running. But it was to kind of talk about, you know, all these things, ledges, shelves, swing walls, peninsulas, all sorts of design things that could potentially be, you know, hazards.
But I don't think we need to like really come up with a solution there, you know, for this. I think as written, I don't know that I would support the CR. It might be, you know, worthwhile in the future with some changes to the wording. But I think as is, I'd probably vote no on this.
I agree.
I agree.
Would anyone recommend a yes vote for the CR?
Only with unspecified changes that we don't know what they would be. So sorry. Yeah. So my vote's no. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll note that we're going to recommend to the rest of the committee a no vote on this CR, and let's move on to 48172, which is, I think, pretty similar to the one we addressed 2 CRs ago.
It is. So this one addresses islands, and it wants to remove the language intended for foot traffic and just make it so that the surface of all islands shall be slip resistant. Does not appear that islands are limited to supervised facilities, so it is reasonable to expect that patrons may access islands in an unguarded facility. And it's basically the same as the wing wall and peninsula surface thing.
Like the last one, I can't think of any facility that has an island or something that's not made with slip resistant materials.
Yep. By definition, an island not more than 18 inches in width shall be designed to discourage a person from walking on the island by not providing stairs, ladders, or bridges to the island. And then the clarification piece was, if the island is intended for foot traffic, it shall be slip resistant. That's the change request, is to just take that out of there. So I guess in one, they're saying they discourage persons from being on the island, but the second one, they're saying if it is intended for foot traffic, then it should be slip resistant. But I also agree, I can't think of anyone who would build an island and not make it slip resistant.
I mean, are these used for things like aesthetics, where, you know, an island that was very narrow, you know, that's not intended to be walked on would, you know, specifically be, you know, kind of, if it's made to look like some sort of, you know, natural feature or something, you know, is that the case, or is that just something that's not very common?
that is done. I think about lazy rivers where you use an island to kind of break up the flow path. So people will either go to one side of an island or to another side of an island where there may or may not be different water features. I think aesthetically in some of the resort pools, you might see some little rock cropping islands that are out in the center of the pool, maybe to kind of give the pool a little bit of aesthetic value, so to speak. I'm not sure those particular islands are very climbable anyways, but they do exist.
Would it be a problem if things like that were required to be slip resistant, even if they weren't intended to be used by anyone?
No, I think they already probably are. Miklos, would you agree?
Yeah, I'd be worried more about trip hazards than slip hazards
Right.
on those. Yeah.
Does there need to be any specification for horizontal versus vertical surfaces? I'm just trying to think what you might have on this island, and if you had any kind of vertical structures versus any horizontal surfaces. Do you think we need that word in there?
I think it's assuming that people aren't going to be climbing over structures that are on there because it says the surface of the island. So I don't know that it's necessary.
I'm thinking if you had it slip resistant and if you had some special feature you wanted to put on your island or graphic on your island that wasn't slip resistant, then that you would have to request a variance for. And that could be evaluated at that time.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I mean, it sounds like it's not really necessary change, but at the same time, it probably wouldn't affect the way these things are designed to begin with. Would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I'll write that we're recommending a yes vote to the rest of the membership for when we vote. Let's move on to 41287-0001.
Okay. 41287. Basically, it's looking to eliminate raised curbs as something that interactive water play venues are kept free of. So basically, right now the language reads, interactive water play venues shall be kept free of landscape debris by either 8 feet of deck area, raised curbs, or raised planters. And the suggestion is to remove raised curbs from that list there, as raised curbs would create a tripping hazard. I guess the comments really would be that curbs are used elsewhere in the aquatic facility. other than just around interactive water play venues to separate landscape areas from decks, walkways, etc. So not sure why there would be a need to eliminate it in this particular instance around aquatic water play venues, interactive water play venues, if we're going to allow them in other areas. It doesn't seem to be less of a hazard in other areas than it would be, or more of a hazard around water play venues than it would be anywhere else. Although I don't disagree that it could create a tripping hazard.
So are these known as anything else? Because interestingly enough, this is the only place in the map that the word curbs shows up. But then my other thought was that, isn't this something where they would do some sort of contrasting stripe or color, you make them a contrasting color to, maybe the spray pad so that it would be apparent that there was, a change?
Well, interestingly enough, 41223 talks about detailed, scaled, and dimensional drawings of the facility for each aquatic venue as appropriate shall include the location and type of, wait, maybe I'm looking at the old version. Hold on, sorry.
No, you're right. It's there, design of deck, curb, or walls. I searched with an S.
Yep, enclosing the aquatic venue. So we do allow them to enclose an aquatic venue, which seems more.
Then we'd end up with conflicting sections if we prohibited them here.
Correct. And it seems as though they would be more of a tripping hazard enclosing an aquatic venue than they would as a landscape barrier.
I mean, I feel like planters could be just as much of a tripping hazard if someone's, not watching where they're going, depending on how high they're raised up.
Right.
I mean, these are going to be used by kids, and kids trip over their own feet all the time. So I don't want to make light of it, but
right.
I'm not sure that if the curb had a contrasting color to, like, say, the spray pad, that it would be, that much of a tripping hazard, especially if the intent is that you're not supposed to be going on, the area, if there's like a defined entry and exit point or not. Does anyone else have any comments on this CR? Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I'll note that the TRC is recommending to the other members a no vote on CR 41287-0001. So let's move on to 412-922-0001.
Amanda, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Jeremy Harris from Louisiana, and I hate to do this, but I had to step away and I came back late when y'all were talking about wing walls. Did it come up for discussion? I heard somebody make a comment about that typically they're in place due to depth changes. I just want to make it known that the plans that we see that typically have wing walls proposed are not necessarily because they need the depth change, is because they need the velocity for the lazy rivers. And we have ran into quite a few proposals where they'll have roughly a 3 to 3.5 foot depth in the lazy river, and then right outside of that wing wall, a 5 foot depth. And that is, typically we would not allow that unless there was a barrier provided. And I hated to go back, but I wanted to at least mention it before we got too far ahead, just in case that, it comes up for discussion. And y'all may have even talked about that. I apologize.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just as a reminder to all listeners, the TRC deliberations and discussions are only open to TRC members. So please make sure that your lines are muted. We are allowing non-TRC members to listen in as a courtesy and for transparency.
Thank you much.
Amanda, did you want to address that in any way? I think the change request was different than the barrier piece, so I don't know that that needs addressed, or you just want me to start with the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I can note that we were recommending as the TRC to, obviously it's not an official vote yet for a no for the whole CR, but that was for other reasons. But we did discuss that this is, you know, an item that really needs to be revisited in the future with specific considerations to how these are used and, you know, the population's using them in terms of non-swimmers and ways to, you know, keep everyone safe, but at the same time not, you know, impede their construction because there are uses for them when there's not a lot of space in the pool or things like that. So, but yeah, let's go on with the next. Yeah.
Welcome to two. Let's see. It's from the code. So 412.922 addresses the term shallow water, and it looks to eliminate shallow water from that particular entry.
I'll just say that this is the title of the section. So I think the thing is that there was no alternate title proposed.
Right.
But I don't know that, I don't think that the title is the best description of the section, but I don't know what we would do in this case if we approve the change request and then left the section without a title.
I have
Could
one
we
that's
maybe-
like that too, Amanda. Yeah.
Yeah, this maybe needs to go back for a little tweaking.
Could we maybe recommend a title like multiple wading pools?
Well, I think the CR is asking for the change because that shallow water is currently undefined. They're not saying that the title doesn't adequately describe the section. So I think as the CR is written, I wouldn't support it.
I agree. I think, you know, there is, you know, in the next cycle, I don't think it's really harming anything right now. You know, it's not really the best title for the section, but because there's no alternative proposed, I don't know that there's a need to make a change at this point.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the additional language there is more of an explanation of why he wants to delete the section on shallow water. I'm not sure. It doesn't.
I know that the submitter I'm not sure if he's proposed definitions for shallow and deep water in the past, but I know that he's had other related CRs. So I'm not sure if it's just, you know, kind of going through and highlighting instances that call this term out. But I think in this case, the title, it's not really reflective of the section, but it's not, it's not really meaningful in any way. It's not preventing the, you know, wading pools are by definition shallow, so, you know, it's not impacting the code requirement in any way for not requiring a barrier between two wading pools.
Right, and I'm wondering though if, yeah, I mean, I guess we can leave it as it is. I think the intent really was to say that no barrier is necessary to separate wading pools that are next to each other, as opposed to when you have shallow, because the first 412.9.2 addresses barrier when you have deep water adjacent to a wading pool. I think in this particular case, they're trying to eliminate the title shallow water, but say wading pools near other wading pools do not need to have that barrier. So it's the clarification from the previous entry to make sure that it's understood that wading pools don't need to be separated by a barrier. Only bodies of water that are deeper do. And I like the intention of that. I like the rewording part of that, but I'm not sure what the title should be. It needs a the adjacent wading pools is the title.
Yeah, wading pools.
Wading pools is the title of the
12.9.
section 412.9.
Yeah, but if we called it multiple wading pools, that would, I think, cover it.
Or maybe just, I don't know. I think we could eliminate the title and make it 412.9. What would that make it?
Well, every section in the MAC has a title.
So it falls under barrier, which it does. It is addressing the barriers. It's almost a barrier exemption.
Yeah, a better word might be exemption or something, but yeah, as we said, there is no proposal for what to change it to. It's just deleting the title, which wouldn't follow the convention of having every section have a title.
Is it worth going back to the submitter and seeing if we can come up with a title?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, anything, something like maybe exemption or multiple wading pools. I don't know.
Yeah. We'll wordsmith it and see if we can come up with something that's better. I do think the intention is necessary. I think we need to keep some of that language, although I guess it stays if we vote no. So
Yeah, the whole section stays. It's just taking out the title.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that we could probably, you could kind of get back to us on if the submitter is agreeable to a different title and what it is, and then we can vote on this one by email.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's move on to 543-0001.
543. Okay, so 543001 is adding a statement about theoretical occupancy to the general operations section of aquatic venues. And let's see, sorry. Backwards a little bit. So it's really just looking to address the bather load, so to speak. It's adding theoretical peak occupancy and just referencing 41235 and saying that it shall not be exceeded. Let's see. Currently, the MAC bases several design factors on theoretical peak occupancy. And it does state elsewhere that occupancy is the reason for immediate correction and closure, however, does not have a requirement in section 5 stating that occupancy shall not be exceeded. This change request looks to add that language to section 5. It is available in section 6. So I guess the question would be, do we need to address it in section 5 as well? As an immediate
Yeah,
closure.
so section 6 has,
Yeah.
under 64212, oh wait, sorry, am I looking at the, yeah, maximum occupancy. So they have to have plans in place to address fluctuations in bather occupancy to ensure maintenance and staffing, and then such plans shall not exceed the maximum design theoretical peak occupancy for the individual aquatic venues or the aquatic facility. I think that is a little bit different, so it's not really giving the inspector the ability to say, to cite a facility for exceeding their design theoretical peak occupancy. It's just making sure that the operator has a plan to address
Right.
occupancy.
So looking to provide that as an immediate correction or closure.
In
And it is a required
6.6,
statement on the sign, so, there would be a way for like the inspector to, if the occupancy is posted, so it's not like they would have to dig up the original plans. And actually it is imminent health hazard number 17 in section 6631, requiring immediate correction or closure, number of bathers.
I'm good, man. I'm on mute.
Theoretical peak occupancy.
Good. Is this? No, it's fine. I'm just monitoring.
Just glad to be back. Thank you for having.
So I guess, Ellen, you were the submitter. Did you realize that this was already addressed in the imminent health hazards?
Yeah, I knew that. It's just not, just like pH and, all the other things that we have in the imminent health hazards, there's still something in, either the design section or the operational section saying, what you're supposed to do. And it wasn't in there. So I thought, it probably needs to be in there. But if you think just having it in the imminent health hazards is enough, then it just seemed like a hole to me, but I'm not like tied into this change request. I don't think if you think it's
no,
not,
I think you have a point that, and I have to look at these, but most of these imminent health hazards, are referencing sections of the map, but I'm not positive that they're all, reflected in the operational section, but it does seem like it would make sense for it to be in there. And I looked and it doesn't really reflect the section in the design section chapter for theoretical peak occupancy, but that's not really a good parallel. So I think the section that you recommended putting it in is probably the best place to put it. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on this?
nothing except that I'll recuse myself from voting since it's my change request.
Okay. Would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, hearing none, I'll write up that we're recommending a yes vote on this CR.
And that was, okay.
So let's move on to 5521-0001, which I think some of these next ones are pretty sensible because it looks like the submitter went through the model inspection form that's on CDC's website and tried to make sure that, you know, there was a code section that could be cited for all of the violations. And here they're proposing some language because there was really no good code section, operational code section to cite for some of these things. So the first one's 5521-0001.
Right, and it's the addition of the the terms ladder, grab rails, and handrails shall be securely anchored. It's really just, as you mentioned, that it's left out of Chapter 5, and this would be the location to insert that language into Chapter 5 as its own section. And I think that's probably necessary if it's going to be in the inspection report.
Yeah, because you're not going to cite a design item during it, that's part of the approved design. So this is really making sure that these are, I know that in New York State, this is something that inspectors would look for in site if it was, it's a safety hazard. So I'm fully in agreement with this proposal.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I will record this that we're going to recommend to the rest of the TRC a yes vote on this CR. I wish they were all this easy. Let's go on to 5661-0001.
Okay, 5661 is proposing additional language to an existing section. The existing language talks about emergency exit routes shall be established for both indoor facilities and outdoor facilities and maintained so that they are well lit, unobstructed, and accessible at all times. The additional language would be that emergency exits shall be clearly marked in accordance with 466. Again, the inspection report addresses the marking and the code does not. So by adding this section, it would add the requirement to section 566 and it'd be in conjunction with the inspection report.
So on this one, is 466 not sufficient for the inspection report?
So yeah, so it's a design requirement, so it would be something that would be looked at in the design phase, and for construction compliance, that these things are all set before permitting a facility. But for things that might, you want to make sure that the labeling is maintained. Say something, a sign gets damaged or something and not replaced, or things like that. So you would want to be sure that these things are continue. Like there's requirements for depth markings, but then they need to be maintained so that they don't wear off or are still visible, accurately reflect depth. So I think this is one of those things, and I'm guessing that a lot of this is building code stuff, which the submitter doesn't like having conflicts with, but I think especially for the outdoor, gates and doors, or outdoor gates, it's useful to make sure that, people know what the emergency exit path is and how to get out of the pool area if needed. So I think it makes sense, and I think it's a needed operational requirement. One thing I was thinking is that, one of the things for the MAC is to not have more than one code requirement in the same section. So technically the submitter is proposing adding it to an existing section, but it is different. So I would almost bump down 5662 and make this the new 5661. But I feel like that type of thing can probably be handled, if the code is being, changes are being made. But that would be my one suggestion on this one. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Sorry to belabor this, but I'm just thinking, because there are all kinds of things in Chapter 4 that of course they need to have upkeep, of course they need to still be working, of course they still need to be functional, right? For the operation and maintenance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to repeat that for every single item. So how do we determine which ones we repeat it and which ones we don't?
I think that the submitter's pointing out that this is on the model inspection report for the MAC. So if it's something that an inspector is looking for, they need to have a code section that they can actually cite, an operational code section. So I think that's kind of the inspection report, and the things people are going to look for during an inspection are going to dictate, you know, what is definitely needs to be an operational requirement that they can cite.
And I could be mistaken, but I think the section number where some of this language is on the report is this 581 as opposed to just the 4 section. And so there's no entry that addresses that. There's no language that addresses what the actual report says. So I guess the alternative would be is to take it out of the report, but I don't know that that's the direction that it wants to go.
The inspection report, is that actually part of the MAC?
It's like a companion piece. CDC came out with it, and they even came out with an app. So it's basically, you know, a tool to inspect facilities for compliance with the MAC. So it's basically a form that would be used by health departments. So yeah, you really would need something to cite. If you're looking for something during an inspection and citing it, you really need to tell the operator what, you know, they can say, well, what requires me to do this? And this is not just requiring you to have that clearly marked emergency exit, or, you know, for the original design, but it's requiring you to maintain the markings.
My understanding on the app is that it was Mac based. However, the app is only currently available for iPad. So just FYI, it is limited in use.
Yeah, and I'm trying to open that up so I can see if that is the code entry for 581 on the actual inspection report form.
Yeah, and in the inspection report form, why can't you go ahead and just reference section 466? I realize that it's not part of the design plan or whatever, you're doing what's currently existing, but if you read the requirement, it's that it's got to be clearly marked, you know, and labeled and conspicuous. So
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what all decision making went into the development of that app.
Well, it was based off the original inspection paper, you know, document PDF MAC inspection form, which I'm not sure if CDC still maintains on their website or not. And I think was supposed to be part of the annex, but I'm not positive how that all worked out.
yeah, I guess I'm not opposed to it, but I'm thinking this is, you know, if you're going to start repeating things that based on what's in a document that's external to the MAC itself, when that document could just reference a different section in the MAC, rather than repeating, I would rather maybe fix the inspection app rather than fixing the MAC by having more repetition.
So you're saying that you think it's in 581? That's
So,
the duck section.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the next one.
Okay.
I was looking at the next CR. Sorry, this was what, 5661.
I think, and I'm not sure if I can find it right now, but I think there's a discussion somewhere, Ellen, in the MAC about the purposes of you know, the design versus the operational section, and how, you know, how they're counterparts. Basically, everything is supposed to be kind of companion, so that, you know, section 4.2.3 has a corresponding 5.2.3 that's, any operational requirement based on the design requirement.
And section 5 specifically talks about operating permits and inspections. And so that's why it would reference that section versus section 4.
Okay, I'll drop it. I'm not completely convinced, but I won't belabor it because we need to get going.
Okay, would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I'll note that the TRC is recommending a yes vote on this CR. So we're coming up close to 3 o'clock. I think that we could probably get the rest of, some of the rest of these ones from the first half of the agenda done. Some of them are pretty straightforward. Are people okay with staying on for a little bit longer, or does anyone have a conflict?
I'll have a 3:30 conflict, but I'm good till then.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that works.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to 581-0001.
Yeah, sorry, this is the one I jumped ahead to. The change request here is really changing the 581 section title to from spectator area to deck areas. This whole entire section just talks about drainage for decks. The overall section of 5.8 is titled decks and equipment. And so the request is to change that spectators area to just decks in general.
I think it makes sense. I think the
Yeah.
the title for 4.8.1, which is its counterpart, is decks with an S. I'm not really concerned about changing it, having one be decks and one be deck areas. I think it just corrects. I mean, spectator areas is completely it's probably just a typo, almost like that it got put in the wrong place. So I think that this is kind of a no-brainer, but does anyone else have any comments or questions? Would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I'll write that the TRC is recommending a yes vote on this CR for when everyone votes. Okay, the next one is 585-212-0001. And Joe, I don't want to steal your thunder on this one, but I think that this is already, section 585232 already has this requirement. It is a little bit in a different section, but this is basically, let me pull it up. This is basically adding a requirement for the emergency telephone or communication device that it's well marked and a sign be posted in accordance with 485-214. But section 585232 already says that a permanent sign providing emergency dialing directions and the aquatic facility address shall be posted and maintained at the emergency telephone system or device. So it seems to me that it's already covered by that section. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
And this is another one that was generated from the inspection report, so perhaps the inspection report can just change the numbering to match where it already exists.
What,
Yeah, because it is a little strange because the emergency communication equipment section is a little higher up in section 5. It's 58521.
Right.
But then, this requirement is specifically under the signage section, which is 58523.
Right. And this, I think this change request really just looks to reference that other section, although it's referencing the section in 4.
Yeah, the design, which I think, what is it, 485?
485214. Which just talks about the signage. So it's kind of a
Right,
circle.
signage shall be posted.
Yeah, so it's kind of a circle from communication to signage, or from signage to the communication section where he recommends it goes, and then back to the signage in the section 5. So I think it's okay where it is.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding this correctly, it's saying in the design section there has to be a sign, but let's say I bought a pool that was off of somebody, or I'm operating a pool that belonged to somebody else and wasn't involved in the design process, and no sign was there. Is that to say that there is no requirement to have a sign? I'm just trying to figure out why are these being generated, and that, if it's a design requirement and you only check it at design, it wouldn't be an operational requirement in the 5 section. Is that the gist of these?
Yeah, so the sign could have been stolen or vandalized or whatever. So the intent is that to make sure it's there when the pool's constructed, and then make sure that it stays there and that it's still readable. And say they change the location of the emergency phone or something, that that they're still providing, that it's still there, because it's important enough that you need to make sure it's being maintained.
It already exists in the facility and operations section, just not in the section that he's proposing it be added to.
Right.
It's in 58523. They'd like to see it added to 585214.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, I mean, technically it's on the next page of the code, so it is a little bit, I can see why they put it in signage, but to some degree it also does make sense to have it right under the telephone, but.
Right. Well, I think the original intention was to try to match section 4 to section 5 as much as possible. So the design requirement was in section 4, and which is the signage piece, not the emergency communication section. So they added the operating requirement to that same numbered section, but in section 5.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a no from me.
Okay. Would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR?
Can I clarify? Because I think I was looking at the list and I was on 585212. So you're talking about 585213?
No, 585232 has a requirement for the sign at the emergency telephone, but it's under the signage, so it's just on the next page.
Okay. Sorry. I was trying to.
Okay.
And so what was the proposal to take it out?
To add the requirement to have the sign in the operations section as required in the design section. But there already is a requirement in the operations section. It's just not in the same numbering.
Got it. Okay.
So would anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR? Okay, I will write it down that we're recommending to the rest of the members of the TRC a no vote because this is already addressed in the operational section, in a different section. So let's move on to 6221-0001.
Okay, so this this particular change request addresses lifeguard supervisor candidate prerequisites. In addition to some other things, there is a prerequisite requiring that the candidate has previous lifeguarding experience of at least 3 months. The change request is to change that to at least 100 hours. The rest of the existing section would stay the same. So in essence, we're looking at going from 3 months, which would be roughly 90 days, and reduce that down to 12 and a half days of experience. If you do an 8-hour day, divide that 100 hours by that 8-hour day. The MAC has agreed that 18 years and above was adequate age level to be mature enough, but there are good supervisors at a younger age, according to the submitter. Was a starting point. The minimum age requirement and having experience to equate to 100 hours of lifeguarding allows for younger folks who may not have gotten that 3 months to go ahead and participate. Let's see. All hours for which a lifeguard is typically paid is part of the factor in there, but it does not necessarily include time on surveillance or participating in training, performing safety checks. It just is a change to the amount of experience necessary, and provides a more specific matrix as opposed to just saying 3 months of a lifeguard. I'm not sure 12 and a half days is quite the right number. But I wouldn't be opposed to changing it to a more evaluatable, I suppose, number.
I'll note that the submitter said that he would be willing to propose an amended CR if various CMAC committees would prefer a different minimum total, that the suggested 100 hours of experience is subjective. But I do agree that, a time length is definitely, an hour's length as opposed to months, in terms of part-time versus full-time. It does help make it more even for everyone. But I don't have the expertise to know, if 100 hours is sufficient or if it should be something different. And this is to be a lifeguard, to take a lifeguard supervisor
Class.
course.
Correct. Well, from an inspector standpoint, I would think that it's easier to find the total number of hours than to say, oh yeah, he worked for us for 3 months. You don't know that he's actually worked at all if he's on the payroll.
Although I don't think this would be something that would really be in an inspection. I think it would be for the training courses would have to require this, and then the inspector would basically be making sure that the
Correct.
whoever's the supervising guard the proper course.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean
This
that.
would be more affect. It would more affect course providers that have training courses. If they have specific prerequisites now, they would need to change that to 100 hours at least. It just seems like unless somebody's been part-time, the 100 hours would probably be less experience than 3 months, which is the current amount.
Amanda, I don't do this very often. Let me weigh in for a second because I was part of that committee in the original MAC that came up with the 3-month time frame. Just talking about that committee deliberations, it's centered around making sure that the lifeguard and supervisor candidate had ample amount of time to develop the skill set to knowledgeably supervise the entire aquatic area. We did talk about shorter time frames, and of course this is going back quite a few years, but we did talk about shorter time frames, and there were several individuals on the committee or several comments made really expressing concern about the experience needed to lead others in an aquatic environment from shorter time frames. So just a background on what that discussion was. And of course, I defer to TRC decisions.
Hey, Julie, is there somewhere else in the code about, because this is just for the training part of becoming a supervisor, right? Then there's the actual becoming a supervisor. And I'm thinking maybe that time requirement might be more suited to actually becoming a supervisor rather than just for the training. But is there anything for actually becoming a supervisor that has a time limit?
Okay, I got confused by what you were saying. Please clarify again for me.
Okay, the section that we're looking at is just about lifeguard supervisor training. Not the actual qualifications to be a supervisor, but the qualifications to just take the training.
Correct.
And I'm thinking that time limit should be a factor in becoming a lifeguard supervisor, but not necessarily the requirements to go through the training.
The requirements to go through the training and requirements to be a supervisor are kind of one and the same. The 3-month time period was a prerequisite.
Okay, so there's no separate section somewhere in here about the requirements for a lifeguard supervisor?
Correct. It's all in that one section. 3 months was a prerequisite for the supervisor certification.
And just as a comparison, 3 months at 5 hours or 5 days a week, 8 hours a day is 480 hours as opposed to the 100 that's being proposed here. So somewhere in there is the appropriate number of hours.
And I think that is an important distinction. I mean, if you've had 2.5 weeks of experience full time, that's a lot. You've seen a lot less in that time potentially than having that same experience over 3 months, even if you're only working part time. It does seem like you would get a wider, possibly breadth of experience over the longer time frame than you would just in 2.5 weeks.
Another reference point for the committee decision back in the first edition, 3 months was generally representative of 1 season.
Right. From the training agency perspective, either way is easy for us to incorporate into our training program. So it doesn't really impact us. We just need to know what that is. But I do agree that the intention was 1 season.
So based on the submitters, thought that they would be willing to entertain a different minimum, do you still like having the season because it has a 3 month time span? Even though they might not have, say they worked part-time, they're still getting that longer experience, even if they haven't guarded for as many hours as someone that spent that same 3 months working full-time. I guess I'm wondering if we should just keep it for a season instead of putting an hour specification instead because you're getting a longer duration of experience, even if you haven't worked as many hours. I don't know if you see what I'm saying. You had like the ups and downs of the whole summer and not just potentially like a couple weeks and then quit your job and then the next season say, oh, I want to go be a lifeguard supervisor. I don't know. It just seems like maybe there could be an either or, but I'm kind of inclined that if there's a reason to put the 1 season in the 3 months, that, you know, changing that to 100 hours might be potentially going backwards, even if that is a little bit easier for the lifeguard. It would also make it more difficult for the lifeguard candidate to show, you know, it's easy for them to say, okay, I've worked 3 seasons or 1 season, but actually adding up the hours to prove they've worked 100 hours would be, I mean, that's the type of thing that, you know, engineers have to do when they take their PE exam, but I don't know that it's something that we would want, you know, expect lifeguards to have to do to take a supervisor course.
Could we change it to at least 1 season, working at least half-time or something like that? Would that get the hours and the season kind of both in there? Maybe this needs to go back for revision, but maybe that would accomplish both things, to say 1 season at least half-time or 20 hours a week or something. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think the I think the 3 months was important though, because the season is different from depending on where you are, right? So if you're in a year-round operation in an indoor facility, your season's an entire year. If you are in the South, it may be 5 or 6 months. In the Northeast, it's maybe 2.5 months. So it may be a little bit of a challenge to just say a season, because it's different for everybody in that particular environment. I think that's probably another reason that the 3 months was chosen. That's in essence, the shorter outdoor season for most folks. Why don't I reach back to the TSC and get their thoughts on this one more time, and I can reach out to the different agencies as well, and get some feedback from them, and then I can present this again at the next call.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, let's move on then to 6321-0001. So this one and the next one are changing, they're adding specific conditions where lifeguards are required.
All right, so in the first one here, it's looking to change entry number 8, I believe. Number 8 in the required facilities would be aquatic venues in which bathers enter the water from any height above the deck, including but not limited to diving boards, drop slides, starting platforms, and/or climbing walls. They're looking to add some language that says this includes pool slides that discharge into water depths deeper than 5 feet, and it would delete the language that says this does not include pool slides. So the change here really addresses deleting the exclusion of pool slides and adding pool slides that discharge into 5 feet or more of water. For those who need the definition of pool slides, definition. Why don't I
It's
find it?
under slides, actually,
Yeah, oh, there it is.
the sub definition.
I knew I saw it somewhere. So a pool slide is a slide having a configuration as defined in the Code of Federal Regulations or similar construction to a playground slide used to allow users to slide from an elevated height to a pool. They shall include children's or tot slides and all other non-flume slides that are mounted on the pool deck or within the basin of a public swimming pool. So we basically had an exclusion for some of those smaller playground type slides that actually went into a pool. This section looks to eliminate that exclusion and now add pool slides to the definition or to the requirement, as long as they discharge into water deeper than 5 feet.
I'm guessing that that's not all that common for these types of slides, you know, based on their intended use to discharge into really deep water. I think a lot of times the minimum is 4 feet, maybe a little less if the manufacturer specifies. But at the same time, I don't really have a problem if there are these designs out there where the slide's discharging into really deep water, to have that be somewhere that should have a lifeguard.
I would agree. I don't know that you see those types of slides all that often anymore. And when you do, I don't know that they are going into deep water. I would agree. They're mostly shallower water.
I disagree. So we get a lot of submittals because there's a lot of older general use pools and other pools that are looking to draw more revenue. So they'll slap a slide in where it never existed before.
Are they installing water slides or pool slides? Because I think that distinction's kind of important. Like number 7, it already says that, yeah, any water slides you need to have a lifeguard, but this is different from the pool slides. So you're saying that you get a lot of people installing?
We get both. We get.
Okay.
We don't like the other ones, but we get them. We get the submittal.
And Cindy, do you agree that this is the type of thing where there should definitely be a lifeguard because it is going into such deep water and used by kids?
I like the idea if they're going to put one in that's going into deep water that it's lifeguarded. I think a lot of, I would say with the exception of a couple fraternities that tried to slap a couple of them in, I would say most of them are in lifeguarded pools.
Yeah, I would have no issue with requiring lifeguards in those cases.
So would anyone recommend a no vote on this CR? Okay, I'll go ahead and write that we're going to recommend to the rest of the TRC that we have a yes vote on this CR. Let's move on to 6321-0002, which is another lifeguard requirement.
Yeah, and this one looks to keep that same list, or the original list, I should say, and then add to it a number 10, which would be any aquatic venue that contains an underwater shelf. Underwater shelves create a section of the pool at one depth in which the bottom of the pool drops off to another depth, and it's in conflict with sloping limits that are currently in place for existing swimming pools. It's an unsafe walking surface in a submerged hazard, as well as a visual obstruction. They're oftentimes.
I can see.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that we kind of discussed this on the last call, I think, with the underwater shelf being like, this is kind of like where that it's undefined in the MAC. It may have been defined in the past, but right now there is no definition. And that a lot of these are kind of used as like sun deck type things where, you know, it's just a gradual drop off. So I'm not sure that requiring a lifeguard for those types of things where it's a resort setting where it's, you know, that type of thing is necessarily, makes sense to have a lifeguard. Obviously, if it was going to drop off into, you know, if there's a big drop off or something, into much deeper water, I think that, but we had, I think in the last call, discussed, you know, limiting the shelves to being adjacent to 3.5 feet deep water instead of 5 feet deep. So it's already kind of putting them into shallower water and some other things along those lines.
Yeah, I think it requires lifeguards at a lot of venues that would not have a lifeguard requirement elsewise.
And if we look at, you know, the places where lifeguards are already required, you know, they are already required if you have any aquatic venue deeper than 5 feet at any point, which actually kind of takes that slide CR out almost, because if it's just charging into water greater than 5 feet, then the pool's more than 5 feet deep. But anyway, also used by unsupervised children under the age of 14 years, being used for recreation or youth groups, being used for group training. So there are, you know, a decent number of requirements already that are pretty general as to what requires a lifeguard. So it seems like, you know, if the aquatic venue has an underwater shelf and it's going to be used, you know, by kids unsupervised, or, you know, if the water is deeper than 5 feet, then it is already going to have a lifeguard. Going back to the last CR, I think it is decent to call out, because if we say this does not include pool slides, then if there are pool slides with water more than 5 feet deep, you know, people could say, well, this says I don't need to if I have a pool slide. And so, I mean, even though it is a little bit redundant, I don't see a problem with
Right.
accepting it.
I don't see any reason why the shelf itself would necessitate, you know, the addition of a lifeguard. I mean, I think all pools should be lifeguarded, but
Right.
but I mean, if we're talking about, you know, construction, or attractions or construction design, we already have the 5 feet or deeper requirement, so I don't necessarily think that the shelf itself shows the need for it. Unless there's like a study out there that shows that significantly increases drowning risk.
And I think in some ways, like what we're doing with those other CRs, you know, by not allowing the shelves to project, you know, where there's adjacent waters 5 feet, you know, moving that back to 3.5, those types of things where we're going to kind of engineer out some of the problems. I mean, granted, 3.5 feet is deep for a small child, but you know, I think there may be some design areas or even language, maybe it should be better that if it has an underwater shelf, with adjacent water greater than a certain depth or something like that. But I think prohibiting it at any venue that contains a shelf, if you have a little, a sun deck that's, 6 inches or a foot above, 2 feet of water, I'm not sure that, that requiring that, especially if the aquatic venue is not really intended to be used by children. If it's at like a college or something, I don't know that prohibiting it or requiring it for all of those venues is really in the intent of where there would be required. And Joe, I just realized we're at 3:30. So does anyone recommend a yes vote on this CR for the underwater shelf requiring a lifeguard? Okay, I'm going to note that we're going to recommend to the rest of the TRC a no vote on this CR. And that just leaves us with two more that we can move to another call, but I think we did a good job getting through quite a number of CRs today. And thank you all for staying later. I will try to get a summary of these all out by the end of the week, and we'll also attach a voting spreadsheet to it so that the CRs that we haven't deferred can be voted on by all of us, and hopefully we can get those wrapped up soon. Does anyone else on the TRC have any questions or comments? Dewey, do you have any remarks to close the call?
No, just always my thanks to everyone for the hard work that you're putting in and the great discussions and just reminders on the TRC evaluations for completed CRs.
Okay, and so we will be having a call next week on the 6th. We've tentatively scheduled calls through July. We definitely are going to need them. So everyone have a good 4th of July weekend, and we'll talk to you all next Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.